From New York, this is Democracy Now!
The importance of this election in Bessemer, Alabama transcends this one workplace. It even transcends this one company. It's really about the future of work and how workers are going to be treated in our economy going forward. Whether or not people are going to be abused or whether or not they're going to be treated with dignity and respect.
Workers at an Amazon warehouse in Alabama have fallen short in their attempt to unionize, but labor groups and workers are now plotting their next move. We'll speak to RWDSU President Stuart Applebaum, the head of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, as well as longtime labor organizer Jane McAlevey about her new piece, Blowout in Bessemer, a postmortem on the Amazon campaign. Then we remember the life of Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General who became a leading critic of U.S. militarism.
The world is the most dangerous place it's ever been now because of what our country has done and is doing. And we have to take it back. We can't wait 4 more years. There can't be any more Fallujahs. And Standing Rock Sioux tribal historian LaDonna Brave Bull Allard has died at the age of 64. She helped lead the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline.
I don't understand why we are expendable in America. I keep telling people, we do our best. We have always been here. This is our land. Why should we fight to live in our land? Why should we have to do that over and over again?
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A warning to our audience, our top stories contain descriptions and images of police violence. Protests have erupted in Minnesota after a police officer shot and killed a 20-year-old black man, Dante Wright, during a traffic stop Sunday in the Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center. Wright's mother said her son called her as he was being pulled over, allegedly because an air freshener was obscuring his rearview mirror, but the call was disconnected. Katie Wright recounted the harrowing moment she learned of her son's death.
A minute later, I called and his girlfriend answered, which was the passenger in the car, and said that he'd been shot.
The Minnesota ACLU called for an investigation by an independent agency, as well as the release of body cam footage and the identities of the officers involved. The shooting took place just miles from where the murder trial of former white police officer Derek Chauvin is entering its 3rd week. On Friday, the chief medical examiner who ruled George Floyd's May 25, 2020 death a homicide testified Chauvin and other officers' restraint of Floyd was the primary cause of death.
My opinion remains unchanged. It's what I put on the death certificate last June. That's cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual restraint, and neck compression.
And in terms of manner of death, you found then, and do you stand by today, that the manner of death for Mr. Floyd was, as you would call it, homicide?
Yes, I would still classify it as a homicide today.
A lieutenant in the Army Medical Corps is suing 2 Virginia police officers who pepper sprayed him, pushed him to the ground, and pointed their guns at him during a traffic stop at a gas station last December. Video of the attack in the town of Windsor circulated over the weekend.
Get out the car!
Get out now!
I have not committed any crime.
You're being stopped on a traffic violation. You're not cooperating at this point right now. You're under arrest for. You're being detained. Okay, you're being detained for obstruction of justice.
Violation. I do not have to get out the vehicle. You haven't even told me why I'm being stopped. I'm actively serving this country, and this is how you're gonna treat me. I didn't do anything. Whoa, hold on. What's going? Hold on.
Aaron Nazario, a black and Latino man, was pepper sprayed in the face right after the exchange. Lieutenant Nazario says he drove to the gas station to avoid pulling over on a dark road after he noticed a police car flashing its lights at him so that he could be somewhere public and well lit while he interacted with the officers. One officer has been fired, and Virginia Governor Ralph Northam said he's directing Virginia State Police to conduct an investigation. Maryland enacted major police reform Saturday, becoming the first state to repeal the Police Bill of Rights, establishing new standards for use of force and how police are investigated and disciplined. Majority Democratic lawmakers overrode vetoes by Republican Governor Larry Hogan to pass the new measures, which also require officers to use body cameras, restrict no-knock warrants, and allow for public involvement in matters of police discipline and misconduct. In labor news, the months-long campaign to create the first-ever union at a U.S. Amazon warehouse ended with the majority of workers voting no. 738 workers at Amazon's Bessemer, Alabama warehouse voted to unionize, while more than twice that number voted against. But the battle isn't over. The retail, wholesale, and department store union that led the drive says Amazon illegally interfered in the vote, and it plans to file unfair labor practice charges with the National Labor Relations Board. Activists and progressive leaders, including Senator Bernie Sanders, praise the organizers, who they say will inspire similar actions at workplaces across the country. We'll have more on the Amazon union efforts after headlines. Coronavirus cases continue to soar across much of the globe. India has overtaken Brazil as the country with the second highest number of confirmed infections after reporting a record 169,000 positive tests Monday. India's total cases are now at 13.5 million, second only to the United States. In Brazil, a new report finds 19 million people have gone hungry during the pandemic, with nearly 117 million, over half the population, facing some level of food insecurity. Hospitals in Germany are filling up as Germany fights to contain a major surge. Elsewhere in Europe, the UK is further easing restrictions as its aggressive vaccine rollout has helped stall new cases. Meanwhile, dozens of poorer nations are likely to face major delays to their vaccination campaigns after COVAX, the international effort to provide those countries with vaccines, said deliveries have all but halted. The World Health Organization again lambasted the shocking imbalance in vaccine access.
On average, in high-income countries, almost 1 in 4 people has received a vaccine. In low-income countries, it's 1 in more than 500.
Here in the United States, COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations are on the rise for the third straight week, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The upper Midwest remains particularly hard hit. Michigan hospitals saw a 30% hike in admissions over the past week. Health workers say the current surge is marked by a larger proportion of young and seemingly healthy patients. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says she will not order new restrictions, but urge high schools to move learning online and for residents to voluntarily refrain from group activities and indoor dining. She also called on the federal government to send more vaccines to Michigan. In Burma, more than 80 people were killed Friday when soldiers opened fire on a crowd of protesters demanding a reversal of the military coup that ousted Burma's democratically elected government. Survivors said soldiers used grenades and other heavy weapons to fire at anything that moved. The massacre took place in the town of Bago, northeast of the capital, Rangoon. Elsewhere, an alliance of fighters from ethnic minority groups attacked a police station in eastern Burma Saturday. At least 10 officers were reportedly killed in the attack. Iran says it will take revenge for what it called nuclear terrorism after an attack triggered a blackout at the Natanz nuclear facility Sunday. Iran blamed Israel for the attack, which came amidst new efforts by Iran to speed up its enrichment of uranium. Reports appear to support Israel's involvement, which Israel has not denied. This comes as Iran, the United States, and other parties are negotiating in Vienna over a possible relaunch of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which Israel opposes, which former President Trump unilaterally withdrew from in 2018. In Ecuador, conservative ex-banker Guillermo Lasso has won Sunday's presidential election. Leftist economist Andrés Arauz conceded to Lasso Sunday night. Lasso is backed by the country's business sectors, favors neoliberal policies, and has vowed to increase foreign investment in Ecuador. Arauz had the support of former President Rafael Correa, who led the country from 2007 to 2017, has been credited with lifting over 1 million Ecuadorians out of poverty. Lasso will assume office May 24th. In Peru, As the country faced its deadliest week since the pandemic began, people took to the polls to elect a new president and Congress in what analysts are calling Peru's most fragmented election in history. Leftist candidate Pedro Castillo is leading in the polls, followed by liberal economist Hernando de Soto and conservative Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, convicted in 2009 of crimes against humanity. There were 18 presidential candidates on the ballot. The top two candidates will advance to a runoff election in June. In the Caribbean, a heavy ash fall has blanketed St. Vincent and the Grenadines after a long-dormant volcano suddenly began erupting Friday.
People looked up, and there is this huge plume of ash hanging in the sky. Silent, deadly, dreadful, ominous.
The eruption sparked outages of water and power across St. Vincent, and more than 16,000 people evacuated their homes. There have been no reports of deaths or injuries, but geologists warn the volcano could still trigger deadly pyroclastic flows of lava ash and volcanic gases. Back in the United States, President Biden released his $1.5 trillion budget request for 2022 Friday, calling for major increases in spending for education, health care, housing, and the climate. Biden's requesting $715 billion for the military, a much less significant increase in other areas, though progressives have been demanding a cut in Pentagon spending. Meanwhile, Biden's holding bipartisan talks today on his separate $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan. President Biden's ordered a study into expanding the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Biden's commission will also look into term limits and offer other recommendations for reform. Former President Trump appointed 3 justices, giving the court a 6-3 conservative majority. A Texas man has been charged with plotting to blow up an Amazon data center in Virginia. Seth Aaron Pendley said he was aiming to destroy web servers used by federal intelligence agencies. He was arrested after an undercover FBI agent gave him fake explosive devices. Authorities tracked Pendley down after a visitor on the website mymilitia.com reported alarming comments by Pendley. According to a Facebook post, Pendley was at the January 6 U.S. Capitol insurrection. An off-duty Pentagon police officer was charged with murder Friday for the fatal shooting of 2 men in Maryland last week. David Hall Dixon claimed he witnessed a car break-in and shot at the men as they tried to flee. But investigators say his account was inconsistent and he was not facing any danger when he fired his gun. Police say Dixon will also face charges related to a 2020 incident in which he pointed a shotgun at a woman's face. Anti-war activist Mark Colville was sentenced Friday to 21 months in federal prison for his role in a peaceful protest against U.S. nuclear weapons. He was last of the so-called Kings Bay Plowshares 7 to be sentenced. In 2018, Colville and 6 other Plowshares activists broke into the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base in Georgia with an indictment charging the U.S. government with crimes against humanity. Former top justice official and anti-imperialist activist Ramsey Clark has died at the age of 93. Clark served as Attorney General under President Lyndon Johnson from 1967 to 1969. During his time at the Justice Department, he played key roles in drafting the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Civil Rights Act of 1968. After retiring from public service, Clark became a fierce opponent of corporate capitalism and U.S.-led wars overseas. He founded the International Action Center in 1992, leading campaigns against sanctions on Iraq, the U.S.-led bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, and the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Clark defended not only controversial world leaders like Slobodan Milosevic, Saddam Hussein, and Charles Taylor, but also prominent activists, including Lori Berenson and Father Philip Berrigan. We'll have more on the life and legacy of Ramsey Clark later in the broadcast. And in North Dakota, Standing Rock Sioux tribal historian LaDonna Brave Bull Allard has died of brain cancer at the age of 64. Allard co-founded the Sacred Stone Camp on her own land in April 2016 to resist the Dakota Access Pipeline. People from around the world traveled to the Standing Rock Reservation in what became one of the largest gatherings of Indigenous people in a century. In September of 2016, Democracy Now! Spoke to Allard at her property, the Sacred Stone own camp just hours before the Dakota Access Pipeline Company unleashed dogs and pepper spray on native land and water defenders seeking to protect a sacred tribal burial site from destruction.
We say Mini Wachoni, water of life. Every time we drink water, we say Mini Wachoni, water of life. We cannot live without water. So I don't understand why America doesn't understand how important water is. So we have no choice. We have to stand. No matter what happens, we have to stand to save the water.
We'll have more on the life and work of LaDonna Brave Bull Allard later in the broadcast. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The largest union drive in the history of Amazon ended Friday with the company led by the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, on top. After a months-long battle, ultimately 738 workers at Amazon's Bessemer, Alabama warehouse voted to unionize, and 1,798 voted no. Ballots from another 505 workers were challenged, mostly by Amazon. The Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union that led the drive says Amazon illegally interfered in the vote, and it plans to file unfair labor practice charges with the National Labor Relations Board. Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez tweeted in response to the vote, how do more than 2,000 workers sign union cards at Amazon's Alabama plant, but only 700 vote yes? And why did only half of workers vote? 3/4 normally vote in such elections. Try examining employer intimidation, he said. Indeed, Amazon spent millions to defeat the closely watched election and even got a private mailbox installed. That's a U.S. postal mailbox installed at the warehouse so it could pressure workers to mail their ballots from work and monitor votes. Amazon responded to the claim in a statement saying, quote, it's easy to predict the union will say that Amazon won this election because we intimidated employees, but that's not true, they said. Meanwhile, the David and Goliath fight in Bessemer has added pressure on Senate Democrats to follow their peers in the House and pass the PRO Act, which stands for Protecting the Right to Organize, and would ban many of the tactics Amazon used to crush the organizing drive. For more, we go to Birmingham, Alabama, not far from Bessemer, to speak with Stuart Applebaum. He's the president of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, recently wrote a piece for Newsweek headlined, Unionizing Amazon Workers Have Already Won. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Stuart Applebaum, can you talk about what happened, your reaction to the vote loss for unionizing Amazon, though you see ultimately what happened as a victory?
Thank you and good morning. I think that it's important that people don't misread the results of this election. People were not saying that they were satisfied with Amazon's working conditions in any way. They were saying that they were afraid to vote for the union. And I also think that although the results were clearly not what we wanted, we still believe that a lot of powerful things have been accomplished in this vote, and that this election is far, far from over. We had a very exciting meeting last night with the committee, the organizing committee. And we're going to be filing objections this week to the vote, and we're going to be looking for a new election. You have to look at what happened. This is the first time ever that there has been an election at an Amazon warehouse any place in the United States, and that's important. I think it opens the door to further organizing. I think that we put a spotlight on the way Amazon treats its workers, and people around the world were astounded to hear about the conditions there. I think that we have become an important argument for the PRO Act because we exposed what it is that employers like Amazon do to try to crush union organizing. And I think that this election has received more attention than elections for a union in decades. And part of the result is that a recent poll showed that 77% of Americans supported the Amazon workers seeking a union. And it's like I look at the alliances that have been created. There was a powerful, powerful, powerful community involvement in this campaign. I know, I believe another one of your guests didn't understand the community involvement, but she hadn't spoken to any of the organizers involved in the campaign. We're proud of the partnership with the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw this as much a civil rights struggle as a union struggle. We think that we breathed new life into the labor movement at the same time. And I think we also showed an inclusive way of organizing. So we see a lot of positive things that came out of this vote. If I could just mention two things quickly. More votes were cast for a union in this election than in all union elections in Alabama in the year before. And I think that's really important.
Stuart, can you talk about the numbers? I mean, you had 5,800 workers at the Amazon warehouse. Less than half of them voted. 700 plus voted for the union. Around 1,500 voted against, apparently, according to the certified count. So, in fact, less than half of the voters voted?
Actually, I think it was about 55% that voted. I'd also say that at least 400 of the votes that Amazon challenged for ridiculous reasons, they would say they couldn't read a signature of a union supporter's vote. And so I think that the numbers really don't reflect how people voted. Also, you have to understand the extraordinary turnover at Amazon facilities. You have a turnover of over 100% a year, which meant that we had no choice but to move fast in this election. It's not like organizing at a nursing home or in other places where there is more stability in the workplace. But a lot of people were not even working at Amazon, people who were working there in January. A lot of them were no longer there by the time the vote started on February 9th.
So you're filing complaints with the National Labor Relations Board on what grounds?
Right. Oh, they broke the law in so many ways. They had union busting, consultants telling employees that if the union were voted in, Amazon may have to shut down the warehouse.
Let's talk about that for a minute. The Intercept reported Amazon paid a consultant with ties to the Koch brothers $3,200 a day to thwart the unionization drive. Also required workers to attend these anti-union captive audience meetings. Can you talk about them?
Sure, of course. And also it was many consultants. They brought in about 200 people to walk the floors, and a lot of people were paid $3,200 a day. It's Amazon left no stone unturned in trying to thwart this effort. And at the captive audience meetings, people would be forced at an hour at a time, several times a week, to listen to consultants telling them why unions are bad, and they didn't need a union, and they should vote against it. And if someone questioned them, a photograph would be taken of their employee badge, and they'd be expelled from the meeting. Let
me go to one Amazon warehouse worker, Joseph Jones, speaking on Democracy Now! About the meetings.
With one of the meetings, one of their biggest points that they were trying to get us outraged about was, look at this balance sheet of this union. They spent $140,000 on vehicles last year. Can you believe it? So I raised my hand, and in this setting, no one talks, right? Because they always open up for questions, but who's going to speak out to the company unless you just don't care? So my question was, okay, so let me understand your position. You want me to be outraged at the fact that this union spent $140,000 on qualified business expenses, as it seems that you're showing us, but Jeff Bezos makes $150,000 every single minute of every single day, but I'm supposed to be outraged at this. You're like, yeah. Yes. Aren't you mad? It's crazy.
So that's Joseph Jones. Your response?
Well, I agree with Joseph, and I'd also point out I don't even own a car. I don't have a car from the union, but our union representatives, whose job it is to travel from workplace to workplace, need vehicles. They just complained about anything they could to make people afraid to vote. They lied. They lied about dues. We explained to people that we want you to pay dues. We hope you will want to pay dues, but it's going to be your choice. Alabama's a right-to-work state. We also know by the time a contract could be negotiated, it would be probably a mostly new workforce, and we'd be doing a dues campaign. But Amazon lied to people about whether or not they'd be compelled to pay money, hundreds of dollars, and that they should spend the money instead on dinners and gifts for friends.
And finally, I wanted to get your response to the Teamsters Union, which has 1.4 million members, saying they're also working on organizing Amazon warehouse workers and delivery drivers. In these times, labor reporter Hamilton Nolan ran a story last month headlined, "The Teamsters hinted a combative national project to organize Amazon." The union has said it's taking a different approach than RWDSU, your union, Stuart. The Secretary-Treasurer of a Teamsters local in Iowa told the New York Times, "We're focused on building a new type of labor movement where we don't rely on the election process to raise standards." Your final response?
I would say that I welcome my sisters and brothers throughout the labor movement to get involved. I think this needs to be a project of the entire labor movement, but I question whether or not you're going to be able to compel Amazon to deal with a union other than through an election and achieving majority status, because we saw in New York City, when we defeated Amazon in their attempt to build a second headquarters in New York City, that we had incredible leverage at that point, and yet it made no difference. And we've seen people talking about maybe instead of having elections, we should sign petitions or we should have small walkouts. I think at the end of the day, that's not going to be sufficient. You're going to need to get an expression of majority support in the workforce in order to compel Amazon to deal with you. But I welcome unions everywhere to be involved in this effort to organize Amazon workers. We have no choice but to challenge Amazon's way of treating its employees and doing business.
Stuart Applebaum, I want to thank you for being with us, President of Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, speaking to us from Alabama. Next up, we turn to Jane McAlevey, a longtime union organizer whose piece in The Nation is headlined, "Blowout in Bessemer, a postmortem on the Amazon campaign." Jane, if you could start off by talking about, from your perch at UC Berkeley's Labor Center, you're author of a number of books on labor, by talking about what you see happened.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today. First thing I want to do actually is salute every single worker at the Bessemer plant for the bravery and the courage that they exercised in the campaign, and I hope that they wind up having a union soon. But I want to redirect it from my perch at UC Berkeley Labor to my years as an organizer, decades actually as a union organizer, and I still do organizing. What I saw were several things from the very beginning, and I outlined them in the article in The Nation. The first was what we call a really inaccurate list, a sort of the gap between how many workers actually work in the facility and how many workers the union thought worked in the facility, and then, of course, the employer stacked it. Let me also just say, I believe they will get a rerun election in that plan because Amazon violated the law left, right, and center. There's no question we need the PRO Act. There's no question Amazon and Jeff Bezos needs to pay a lot of taxes. Amazon needs to be unionized, and I'm looking forward to it. But we know in really hard elections, which I've had the pleasure of running and helping workers win many times, going up against very profoundly serious union busters, there are a series of steps that we have to take in order for the workers to stand a chance. And one of them, ironically, is the one that Stuart Applebaum just mentioned at the end of the interview, which is developing majority support, which I write about in the article. So you could analyze that from the period when they surfaced the campaign, which was October 20th at the plant gates, straight through to when they filed for the election, which was in November. They were informed at that time that they were off by several thousand workers in the assumption about how many workers worked at the plant. And I'm not saying, there should be no mystery. They should be given a list. If workers want to form a union, why doesn't the employer have to give us a list? But they don't, because they're not fair, just like they're not fair in Georgia. So if you deal with the reality that these are outrageously unfair conditions, what are the steps you have to take to try to win? So if I was on the ground in Amazon, I would have tried to, instead of getting simply majority card signatures between November 20th, or the date they were informed that they were really off on the numbers, and December 20th was the hearing date. You would want to be judging right then. Could you get a majority of those workers to publicly commit to vote to support the union? It's called a vote yes petition. It's called a structure test. It's a normal thing that union organizers do in hard campaigns, and I've had to do many of them with workers. Because we know once the employer campaign gets off the ground, it's going to erode a ton of support. So when I was trained to be a union organizer when I was very young by a union called 1199, I was trained to file with no less than 75% of the workers on membership cards. Not 30%, not 40%, not even 55%. We assume 25% of our vote is going to be shaved by aggressive union busters. When it comes to the captive audience meetings, of course they're doing captive audience meetings. I've had workers dragged in hospital campaigns. I've had nurses dragged away from a patient into a captive audience meeting, pleading to let the union buster let her finish a procedure during an operation with a patient, and been dragged into a captive audience meeting. So what's our approach to captive audience meetings? Ours is, in the campaign I'm describing to you, which was 2006, in a right-to-work state, ours was, we printed out, we made beautiful tickets that looked just like movie tickets, like you would get a ticket to go into the movie theater when we can go back into them. We printed movie tickets. We bought popcorn. We bought microwave bags of popcorn. Every nurse in the hospital had access to a break room. We said, you need to go in en masse. We made a plan with the workers for how to approach the captive audience meeting, which was take a ticket, circulate it, take the popcorn, make the popcorn loud, go into the captive audience meeting and have 100 nurses chewing popcorn as loudly as you can, and then get up and say it's time to go back to your patients. There's a strategy and a method for every part of a hard campaign. Do we always win when we follow them? No. Do we stand a better chance of winning them? Yes. One of the things I talked about in the campaign was, working a plant gate strategy. You can't win at a plant gate strategy with a normal company, let alone one known for its surveillance, because workers will be too scared to talk to you. So a fundamental of hard campaigns is about building majority support going into the election, knowing the workers are ready to stand up to union busters, and you have to do that by house calling. You have to knock on the door unannounced for every single worker in that campaign, and they're going to be really hard conversations because people are polarized and scared. But there are methods for how we win hard-to-win union campaigns. Kate Bronfenbrenner wrote about them. She's now at Cornell. She was a union organizer who's now at Cornell's Labor Institute. She's written for decades about the methods. There are methods, and we need to follow them. And I wrote my article for the future Amazon workers who are going to try and win their campaigns with the hope that they stand a better chance, because we need Amazon organized yesterday.
Now, you were saying early on that you thought that the union was going down in flames in Bessemer. What were the indications to you?
Yeah, the first one, which was the inaccuracy of the list, right? The sort of gap between when they filed for the election in November on 1,500 workers, that's 1,500 workers, versus when they got to the hearing in December, and it was clear that there were 5,800 workers. Did Amazon stuff the numbers? Probably. They have in every election I've been involved in. But when I go to a hearing like that, when I'm at the labor board hearing and we've got workers with us and we're debating with the employer what's going to happen, right there was very big trouble. And every organizer I know who trained me and I work with, we're all immediately emailing each other saying, this is big trouble and we're really worried about it. So From December on, I think there were a series of concerns that people who have run against hard union busters had about this campaign. And we wished that it had a different outcome. And I wish that my article was never in The Nation magazine. The truth is, I wrote it for Amazon workers. And I've had Amazon workers in trainings, and I hope to have more Amazon workers in trainings, right? I work with and teach people how to win hard campaigns, because there are things that we know that you have to do. Another one I mentioned, which is this whole discussion which just surfaced again, about how do you talk about dues? The first thing the employer does in campaigns I've run is actually put out food on the table and show workers, or radios or things that you could buy for the equivalent of the dues. This is standard operating procedure and why we need the PRO Act. Desperately why we need the PRO Act. Everything I'm saying is why we need the PRO Act. But as an organizer, I'm also saying we have to give workers the best shot humanly possible in the conditions under which we currently work. Stacey Abrams made that case beautifully in the New York Times about how they won the 2 Senate races in Georgia. It wasn't because folks just showed up there and took an approach to talk to everyone who agreed with them. They went on the doors, masks on. She wrote a centerpiece in the New York Times about how to win a hard campaign. It's very similar.
Jane,
actually.
We have 20 seconds. The final comments on what you think has to happen next.
First of all, I think a lot of unions have to collaborate on this, for sure. I don't think trying to run a straight National Labor Relations Board election process is the way to go with Amazon. So whether it's what the Teamsters are going to do, you can do what's called a strike for recognition under U.S. labor law. You can actually walk out and demand recognition and demand your employer recognize you. We used to do more of that, but that takes building supermajority support. So what I hope is that Amazon workers look at the lessons from Bessemer, regroup, that unions actually put together a serious plan to take on them, Uber, Lyft, Silicon Valley, and every one of those companies that is literally destroying the lives of workers in this country and desperately need to be unionized. We need to give the workers a fair shot when we go after Amazon.
Jane McAlevey, I want to thank you for being with us, union organizer, negotiator, scholar, currently senior policy fellow at UC Berkeley's Labor Center. A recent piece we'll link to in The Nation, Blowout and Bessemer, a postmortem on the Amazon campaign. Next up, we remember the lives of Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, and LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, Native American historian of the Standing Rock Sioux. Stay with us. Solidarity sing-along singing Union Made. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Former U.S. Attorney General, longtime human rights lawyer Ramsey Clark has died at the age of 93. He was the last living member of Lyndon Johnson's cabinet. Clark was credited as being a key architect of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Fair Housing Act of 68. He served as Attorney General from 67 to 69, during which time he ordered a moratorium on federal executions and opposed J. Edgar Hoover's wiretapping of Martin Luther King, but he was also involved in the prosecution of anti-war activists. After leaving office, Ramsey Clark became a leading critic of U.S. foreign policy. In 1972, he traveled to North Vietnam in defiance of the U.S. government to document U.S. war crimes. It was one of many trips Ramsey Clark would take to meet the victims of U.S. militarism. Also in 1972, he successfully defended the Harrisburg Seven, a group of religious anti-war activists led by the former Catholic priest Philip Berrigan and his wife Liz McAllister. He would go to defend members of the Plowshares, the anti-nuclear arms movement founded by Philip and Daniel Berrigan. In 1989, Ramsey Clark traveled to Panama to document the devastation brought by the U.S. invasion, which he called a, quote, physical assault of stunning violence. Beginning in the early 90s, he became a leading opponent of U.S. policy in Iraq, speaking out against the first Gulf War, the U.S. sanctions, and the 2003 invasion. He would later join Saddam Hussein's defense team. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, Ramsey Clark helped found the anti-war group Answer. He was a longtime defender of Palestinian rights and represented the Palestine Liberation Organization. Palestinian legislator Hanan Ashrawi wrote on Twitter, Clark, quote, was an indefatigable defender of the Palestinian and human rights, a lawyer who knew and pursued genuine justice and the rights of the oppressed, unquote. Ramsey Clark was also a longtime critic of the U.S. embargo of Cuba. He was born in Dallas, Texas in 1927. His father, Tom Clark, served on the U.S. Supreme Court. This is Ramsey Clark speaking at a protest against the presidential inauguration of George W. Bush in Washington, D.C., January 20th, 2005.
Really to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. We have to take the Constitution back. Back from crimes against peace, from war crimes and crimes against humanity. You know, the Nuremberg Tribunal called the war of aggression the supreme international crime. And it is. And George W. Bush has waged a war of aggression against Iraq. He's killed more than 100,000 people. Are their lives worth nothing? Can we have a moment of silence in memory of all the people who've died in Iraq because of the criminal acts of George W. Bush in waging this war of aggression? Every moment of their lives is fraught with danger right now because of us. The world is the most dangerous place it's ever been now because of what our country has done and is doing. And we have to take it back. And we can't wait 4 more years. There can't be any more Fallujahs. Fallujah is the 21st century equivalent of Guernica. We just went in and destroyed that city. Drove the people out, killed them, thousands, we don't know how many. They won't even bother to count who's been killed or how many or estimate how many. They just keep killing. Almost every day we're reading about another checkpoint where some family got wiped out because they didn't do what they were supposed to do, according to the military there. Abu Ghraib is unbelievable in the innocent times of 1961. That we would torture people that way. And on the instructions of the President of the United States and his highest legal advisors. Torture's okay, they said. Go for it, fellas. If we can't renounce that and remove it from office, then the Constitution doesn't work anymore. We've got to do more than take back the Constitution. There has to be accountability for what's happened. The Constitution says that the President, Vice President, and other officials of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of high crimes and misdemeanors. If you care about the Constitution, you better start talking to your member of the House of Representatives and say impeachment now is essential to the integrity of the United States government. And to the future of the United States. We've had more than 500,000 people sign on, vote to impeach. We need to get 5 million, and we need to get 5 million on there quick. And then the Congress will react. That's former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark speaking January 2005. 7 years later, in 2011, 6 years, he appeared on Democracy Now!, was interviewed by Juan Gonzalez about President Obama's drone war program. Clark had just finished defending the Hancock 38, a group of peace activists arrested at a U.S. drone base near Syracuse, New York.
During the trial, the day after I testified, in fact, the New York Times had an editorial about a guy who was working on peace in Islamabad. He'd met with a family the day before, and not the day before, they had left to go back up to the frontier territories. 11-year-old boy was killed in the car driving back home, and then we had 20-plus troops, soldiers of an ally, more or less, Pakistan, killed by our drones. Incredible. I mean, they're assassination and murder weapons, and they create more fear and anger because they come out of the blue. You don't feel safe any place. You're not safe any place. They'll chase you down any place. And it's a weapon that ought to be prohibited. It's a criminal weapon. And
yet President Obama just said yesterday that he will not apologize for the attack. The issue of these drones and what is happening around the rest of the world as they see the willingness of the United States to basically go into any country it feels necessary to do so with these drone attacks.
Yeah, we totally disregard the sovereign territory of a big country, Pakistan, a major country, and basically say we could kill anybody there we decide to, without consultation. So watch your step. It's a weapon of extreme provocation and extreme danger and extreme inaccuracy. Its ability to address a single individual is non-existent. It kills whoever happens to be around. And it also kills sometimes when there's no one around except a bunch of people in a meeting because you've got the wrong target. But the decision to murder or to assassinate anybody, any place, and to send one of these things out is itself a crime.
That's former Attorney General Ramsey Clark speaking in 2011. When we come back, we remember Standing Rock Sioux tribal historian LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. Nana's Lullaby by Mary Youngblood. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show remembering the life of Standing Rock Sioux historian LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. She died Saturday at the age of 64 from brain cancer. In 2016, she helped start the Sacred Stone Camp on her family's property in North Dakota. People from around the world traveled to Standing Rock Reservation, what became one of the largest gatherings of Indigenous people in a century. I first spoke to LaDonna at Standing Rock in September 2016 along the Cannonball River on her property just hours before the Dakota Access Pipeline Company unleashed dogs and pepper spray on Native Americans seeking to protect a sacred tribal burial site from destruction.
My name is LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. My real name is Tamakawa Shtewi, her good earth woman. I am Ihunktawa, Hunkpatina, and Pabaska, Dakota on my father's side. I am Hunkpapa, Sihasapa, and Ogwala, Lakota on my mother's side. When they told us that they were putting this pipeline in, but refusing to acknowledge us, if you look at the Dakota Access maps, they don't even acknowledge our nation. We are not black. We're not blacked out like some people make maps and they do the reservation boundaries. We're not even in there. They said they did not have to consult with us. That pipeline is 500 feet from our reservation line. When that pipeline breaks, and it will break, it will hit early Head Start children in 2 seconds. It will take out our elementary in 5 seconds. In 45 minutes, it'll take out our major water intake that feeds water to all the people here. I don't understand why we are expendable in America. I keep telling people, we do our best. We have always been here. This is our land. Why should we fight to live in our own land? Why should we have to do that over and over again? We start our lives, we do our best to live. Why? I would never hurt anybody. I have always done my best to do good things in my community. Why can't they just let us live? We love this land. And half of the time I feel bad because they make us feel bad for loving this land. But most important, we love the water. Every year our people sacrifice. We go 4 days without drinking water so that it reminds us how important this water is. And I ask everybody, do you go with 4 days without water? What happens to your body on that third day? Your body starts shutting down. So we remind ourselves every day how important. We say, Mini Wachoni, water of life. Every time we drink water, we say, Mini Wachoni, water of life. We cannot live without water. So I don't understand why America doesn't understand how important water is. So we have no choice. We have to stand. No matter what happens, we have to stand to save the water.
That's LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. We spoke to her on her property at the Sacred Stone Camp in September, Labor Day weekend of 2016. A few weeks later, she visited Democracy Now! Studios here in New York. While she was here to speak at the United Nations, Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed her.
I told Dakota Access that if I'm the only person standing, I'm standing. They will not build this pipeline. I have personal reasons, though, you know. My son is buried there, and I'm just a mom. But in my mind, I can't conceive anybody to build a pipeline next to my son's grave. So like I tell everybody, it's not some grandiose save the world. It's just a mom. So that's just on my personal side. But did you see where I live? Oh, my God, it is so beautiful. I mean, every day the buffalo are out there, the eagles are out there. I love my river.
Were you surprised by the enormous response that occurred to the encampment from native peoples around the country and around the hemisphere, really?
Overwhelming. Shocking. Amazing. That tells me that world thought needs to change now. That tells me that people are saying no more. You know, how it is to live our lives, we spend a lot of time with people saying we're this, we're that, we can't do this. We live in a world of extreme racism where we exist. And I think we're at the point now where it's just no more.
On September 3rd, after we interviewed you at your camp, that's on your property, the Sacred Stone Camp, we went over beyond the resistance camps because hundreds of Native Americans were going to plant their tribal flags in an area where the pipeline was being built. They didn't think it was being built that day. It was Labor Day weekend, but in a ceremony to take that stand. But when they got there, they saw the bulldozers in action, bulldozing the very sites that your tribe, that the Sacred Stone, that the Standing Rock Sioux tribe had designated, had said was burial grounds and sacred sites. I wanted to go to that moment and ask you about what happened after that. The security guards working for the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, attacking the Native Americans with pepper spray and with their dogs.
This guy maced me in the face. Look, it's all over my sunglasses. Just maced me in the face.
These people are were threatening all of us with these dogs. And that woman over there, she was charging them and it bit somebody right in the face.
The dog has blood in its nose and its mouth.
And she's still standing here threatening you.
Why are you letting her dog go after the protesters? It's covered in blood.
Over there, with that dog. I was like walking, throw the dog on me straight, even without any warning, you know. Look at this. Look at this.
The
dog did it, you know. Look at this. Yeah,
so there we see the dog's nose and mouth dripping with blood, and they're attacking the protesters. LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, you were there as well.
Yes, we had got there. Let me back up first. You know, just 2 days before, we marked all those burials and sacred sites, and then we submitted them to the judge. And the judge notified Dakota Access. So when they stopped construction 40 miles away and drove up to take out those burial sites, it was absolutely shocking for us. You know, when I got up there, you know, I remember my friend, she was just crying, and I was like, I couldn't believe they were doing that. And so people were hollering, and that man had just pepper sprayed everybody, and I was just like, oh my God, what is happening here? And I remember the dogs and stuff. That big gray-headed dog was on this side, and that woman was singing dogs on this side. And I was standing in the middle there, and I was like, what do I do? And so I closed my eyes and just started praying. I just stood there and prayed. And I thought, where am I? Is this America? Is this really happening? And I opened my eyes, and the people were getting in their trucks. I had no idea at that time the horses were coming to protect us from behind us. And as I stood there, I think it's still very shocking to me, because people were hollering and people were crying. And these guys finally started to get their dogs and put them into their vehicles, and the dogs tried to bite their owners. It was just chaos. And so they finally started leaving. And I looked at that ground, and I was like, oh my God, who does this? Who comes and just digs up those graves? It's almost inhuman to me. I don't understand it. I can't understand it.
And so the point, I think it's important to underscore that you had already provided to the court the list of the burial sites that you thought were sacred sites that should be preserved, and the company, before the judge can even render a ruling, then goes in on the weekend to destroy those very sites.
Yes. And that's what I keep on telling people is, why are these people out there protesting? It's because of these things. It's because of what's actually happening out there on the ground. I tell people that this is not about just this pipeline. It's about the water. It's about the water. It's about having the right to live our lives. It's about being able to make sure my grandchildren has clean water. To me, it's just like common sense. And so we must stop this.
How long will these resistance camps continue?
We're in a process of healing. I don't think it's going to end. We have only just begun. We are fulfilling prophecy now. The prophecies our people told 100 years ago are coming to pass. I see them before my eyes. Nothing is going to go back. We can only change. My whole idea is to have the world change their worldview, that maybe we can live with the earth instead of destroying the earth. And I'm hoping that all people can get that message.
Standing Rock Sioux Lakota historian LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. She died Saturday at the age of 64 from brain cancer. Visit democracynow.org to see more of our interviews with LaDonna Brave Bull Allard and former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who died Friday at the age of 93. And that does it for our show. A very happy birthday to Maria Teresina and Anna Ozbek. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a senior news producer to join our team here in New York City. Learn more and apply today at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember, wearing a mask is an act of love.